So thank you so much, Troy, for joining us in our virtual field day. So you're going to tell us a little bit about irrigation sensors. What do you think? What's kind of the major thing that irrigation sensors can tell us?
So irrigation sensors tell us one of two things. One is how much water is in the soil, and or what the soil water tension is. And with that measurement, we can decide when to irrigate and how much water to apply.
So you've told me before there's kind of two major classes of sensors, right?
Right.
So what are those two types and what's different about them?
There's two different categories that we kind of group sensors in. There's soil water tension, which measures how hard the soil is pulling on the water. It's actually vacuum that we're measuring. And then also the soil water content, or what the volume of water is that's in the soil. And so there's two different types. So let me talk about soil water tension sensors first. So the main way that most people might be used to looking at soil water tension sensors is a tensiometer. So a tensiometer is basically just a tube, a plastic tube, that has a porous ceramic cup that is, or tip on the end of it. So this one actually is broken, and you can see that it goes up into this tube. So we fill this with water, and then we seal it off tight, and then we bury this tip in contact with the soil, and then as the soil dries out, it pulls the water out of there, and then it pulls a vacuum inside of here, and there's a tension that we can measure directly with a tension gauge. And it's a vacuum gauge, basically. And so we usually use centibars, or a bar is also a measurement of pressure. It's like 15 psi per bar or something. So 1/100th of a bar, we can measure that tension in there. And then we use that to irrigate. So when it's full, that soil water tension is going to be at or near zero. So field capacity when it's full is going to be close to zero. When it's begin to see water stress is going to be 50 or 60, 70 or something like that.
Okay.
So we use that to do that soil water tension. The other class of sensors measures the soil water content, and these are by far, there's many more of these types of sensors, and there's different technologies that are used. One is called capacitance, and so it basically measures the soil's ability to hold an electric charge for a short period of time, and so this is buried in the soil, and then it uses an electric signal to measure what that soil's dielectric constant is across that soil, which we can then correlate to soil water content. But this is good because we can also bury it in the soil, and we can plug it into a data logger, and it can report to us. We can have the telemetry connect to it, so that we're looking at it on the internet and things like that. So that's really good. This is also called a TDR, time domain reflectometry. It's a different technology, again, where it's measuring the response of a signal that goes down these two different wires. And so this is a little bit better in that it measures a little bit larger soil volume. But again, we would dig a hole, install this very carefully according to the manufacturer's recommendations, and then plug this into a data logger and then use that to measure the soil water content. Soil water content is measured in the volume of water in the soil, so it's usually like cubic centimeter per cubic centimeter, or inches of water per foot of soil water depth.
So we've got a great big field. Obviously, we're going to have a limited number of these sensors. How is a grower going to decide where to put them to be the most representative?
Yeah, good question. So there's two philosophies, and it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. One is to kind of pick a soil that's representative of the entire field, and then kind of manage the entire field for that average soil, so for like an average soil condition. And then the other one is to pick kind of your soil that has the lowest water holding capacity, the soil that's sandiest or rockiest, whatever, that the location wherever you see the water stress first. Because if I have a small water holding capacity because it's sandy or rocky or something, it's going to run out of water soon. And if I want maximum yields across my whole orchard, then I might want to put it there so that I apply water so that that is never stressed,
Right.
but also I don't apply too much water so that I'm leaching water in that soil, so that and then if I manage for that soil with a really small water holding capacity, then the rest of the field is going to be fine. So one thing we don't want to do is put it in an area that's just kind of always waterlogged because there's poor drainage there, or you don't want to put it in, you know, somewhere that's just not it's going to be not useful for that reason. Also, not right at the edge. You need to kind of come in a little bit from the edge of the orchard, because the trees on the edge of the orchard actually use a little bit more water. They dry out a little sooner than the trees on the inside, and so it's just not as representative of the whole field.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got sensors in a field, and it's telling us some numbers. How do we decide what those numbers mean to us? When do we actually trigger irrigation?
Yeah, good. So we get this soil water sensors, and then they give us a signal. They give us this line that comes back. And so when either with soil water tension, it goes low when you or goes low when you irrigate, and then it gets higher as it gets water stressed. And the soil water content sensor that gets higher. Let's see. When more water in the soil increases that number, and then it gets drier as it comes down. So what we want to do with those numbers, in order to make them meaningful to us, we need to know when is the soil full, and when are the trees going to begin to experience water stress. So here's my little demonstration here. So I have my soil, and then I'm irrigating, and I'm applying the water to the soil. So obviously soil has this ability, like a sponge, to hold water and store it for use later by the trees. And as but at some point, adding additional water, even though, you know, it makes us feel good because we're irrigating and it goes into the soil, we see it go in, but the soil can only hold so much water. So that the maximum amount of water that soil can hold long term against that pull of gravity is called field capacity. And so that is a very important number that we need to know for irrigation water management. Why? Because that's the top. We don't want to put more water in the soil than it can hold.
Right.
Because what happens is we wasted our time, we wasted our money, we probably also rinsed a lot of those soluble nutrients out of the soil. We lost that water, and we lost those good things that our trees need. So field capacity, the maximum. And then the other point that we need is to know when it's going to begin to experience water stress. So when my soil is at field capacity, just like when I squeeze a sponge, lots of water comes out very easily. When it's at or near field capacity, the trees don't have to work very hard at all to get that water away from the soil. However, at some point, the water is so depleted that it takes a long time for the water to get to that soil root hair, and then the roots got to pull really hard to get that water away from the soil. Remember, soil water tension, it's pulling on that water. The tree has to pull that water away from the soil. So it begins to be a point where the tree starts to shut down and it starts to begin to experience water stress. Any other indication of water stress, maybe the leaves start curling or something like that, then we draw that line on that graph and we say, okay, we're not going there in the future. Another good rough estimate for a lot of soils is you take your field capacity line, you take about 75 or 80% of that number, and that's going to be a first guess as to where to draw that line. It doesn't really hold as well for like sandy soils. Sandy soils, it's more like, 50 or 60% of that number where you're going to begin to see water stress. So, but still, That's how we want those two numbers: field capacity, first water stress, and then we want to stay between those two lines. Anywhere between those two lines, the trees are going to be fine, and that's how we use that to do water management.
Perfect.
So.
Well, I think it's super useful for folks to have sensors in their blocks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that can impact folks in different blocks. So thanks so much for explaining
Sure.
what they are and how we can use them.
Yeah.